So I was staying at my friend's uncle's house, who was like right outside of the Strip. But that night, we just so happened to want to see the Michael Jackson Cirque du Soleil show. Okay. And that takes place in Mandalay Bay. So Mandalay Bay has a theater that is just 100% of the time used for that show. So we were in Mandalay Bay for a 9:30 p.m. showing of that show when the shooting happened. So that's why I was there. Yeah, so it was a 9:30 show, as I said. So we were just kind of there to see that. I would say like 35-ish minutes of the show had happened, and then all of a sudden the curtains just kind of shut. And so we were like, oh, is there an intermission? Like super confused. And one of my friends had seen it before, and so we kind of looked to her and we were like, is this normal? Did they do this last time? And she was like, not that I remember. And they didn't say anything. They just said, stay in your seat, like the show will continue soon type of a thing. So we all just kind of were just chilling on our phones, thinking nothing of it. But then a full 30 minutes passed, and we were like, okay, something's going on. And so I immediately thought that it was a shooter, but didn't want to be the one to say it, so just kind of kept my mouth shut. And my friends were thinking that it was just something going on in the casino, and we really didn't know what to think. And then all of a sudden, a guy behind us was checking the news and was on his phone, and the man behind us said, there's a shooter in the building. And so then I heard him, and then I turned to my friends, and we all were kind of in shock, and we were like, I have no idea what to think of it at the moment. And then before we could even really react, they came over the PA system and told us, and then they said, we're locking down the theater, no one's entering or exiting, we're on lockdown. And they were like, so for your safety, don't move. And so we all just kind of stayed put. And that went on for a little while, and I was really hoping that it was a small type shooting, something they would resolve really quickly, one person, one gun, in and out type of an ordeal that we could just, carry on with things pretty quickly. But that wasn't the case. So they ended up quickly telling us that this was a much bigger thing than they were anticipating it being, and that we were going to be there overnight. So it very quickly turned into a scene from the Titanic, where they started pulling the elderly and the children, and they went behind the bar of the theater and started grabbing all the water and started rationing the water out to people that were sick. And they were working on getting an emergency bus there, but they told us they could only take 20. So we were not in the group of people that were allowed to go on the bus. So they were immediately just looking for kids and sick to get on out of there. And then because of how many shots were fired, they thought that there were multiple shooters up and down the Strip and all over the place and even within the building. And so we had gotten word that there was another shooter on the 4th floor, which ended up not even being true, but at the time you don't know, so you have to take every safety precaution as if that is the truth and what is happening. So that was probably the scariest part of it, is because we were on the 2nd floor, because the theater spreads from the 1st to the 2nd floor area. And so we thought there was a shooter running down the stairs, from 4th coming to us, because the second most concentrated area of people was the theater next to the country fest that he had already hit. So they thought a shooter was running down at us. We had a SWAT team come in. There were 12 cops in the room. It was ridiculous how much, there was going on in there. And as they're telling us that they're going to turn the lights off because there's a shooter coming and they don't know what's going to happen, and they didn't want him to be able to aim at us, so they turned off all the lights and we just sat in the dark, just waiting. And then as they turned off the lights and we were waiting, the doors of the theater started shaking because someone tried to enter. And so people started screaming, everyone hit the floor. It was just hysterical. You heard the guns clock of the guards trying to be ready in case someone was able to get through. The doors were locked, but just safety precautions. So that kind of happened. And then we just sat on the floor shaking and waiting for anything to be resolved. And that went on for hours and hours, and I even fell asleep at points, in and out of being there and then not being there. And points were super hectic and scary when they thought someone was coming, and then points just kind of felt surreal and I was just dreaming, because I would fall asleep because I was there for so long. So that went on for a very long time. And then they had a whole line of guards at one of the emergency doors from there out to the street once they figured out that it was safe enough to remove people. So that was at 4:30 in the morning, I want to say. So I was there for over, I think 8 hours, something like that. And so then they finally got safety buses in, and so they started taking us out in groups of 30, and we would just walk out in between the cops to the bus. And then from there, they shuttled us over to the UNLV stadium, or basketball arena, whatever it was. And we got in there at like 5:30 in the morning, and we had someone waiting there to pick us up, but a lot of people that were staying like on the Strip, you weren't allowed back, like everything was shut. So I really don't know what happened to like anyone. We were all just being dropped off in this parking lot and being told like figure something out. And so yeah, so nobody could really go back, and thank God I was not staying in the Strip, so I was able to get out of there. But as far as everyone else goes, I have no idea what really happened. So because of the time change, it was ridiculously late back home in Cleveland where my family was. I honestly thought that I was as good as dead for a solid 30 minutes of the whole thing when the screaming happened and the door shook and that whole thing. There was a certain period that I like actually thought that I was going to die. And so at that point, I did send out messages of panic saying goodbye and like love you and stuff like that now looking back, I feel like ridiculous having sent, but in the moment it felt like the most appropriate thing that I could do. So yeah, whoever was up definitely, they got updates of every second of what was happening until actually at one point the cops told us, or somebody, whoever it was, there was like another man over the PA that was just working in the theater that wasn't part of the police force, but somebody had told us that we were sitting ducks with our phones because if we turned off the lights to not aim at us, having your phone light meant that they could see you. So at one point I felt unsafe having my phone out, and so once that occurred, I ended up just saying bye to anyone that was up talking to me and then just put my phone away and like kind of prayed for the best. So it was my friend's 21st, and it was like a family trip though. It wasn't like a kid type trip. It was like her and her twins. It was like her parents and her aunts and her uncles, and like it was a family trip that we were out there for, and we were with family the whole time. And then that was like the 1 second that we were like, okay, like we're gonna do something without the adults. So me and two of my housemates decided to split off and go see a show. So that was our big thing that we were doing that separated it from being with the family, and that's of course, when everything happens. So honestly, I think about how unfortunate it is that I sat there fearing for my life for so many hours when in reality, since it was just the one guy, after he was gone, there was no further threat, yet I had to sit there continuing to fear for hours that, there were more out there. And I don't know, I think the worst part of the whole thing is it made me skeptical of everyone that was in the theater with me, which probably doesn't make a whole lot of sense, but literally we'd be sitting in the dark and a random person would stand up and I was convinced that they had a gun and they were part of this and they were gonna shoot too. And so that was really weird for me. And I think coming out of this, the thing that I'm struggling with the most is like trust that everything's gonna be okay. Our a cappella group had a performance this past Friday at the convention center, and it was kind of a big deal for me walking in there for our sound check on Thursday because I had not been in a big concentrated area theater type setting since then. And it's just, I don't know, at this point it's just scary for me because I never thought in a million years that something like that would happen with me there. Like you hear about it on the news, but you don't think you're going to be a part of it. And so now that I was a part of that, I think more than anything I just like fear it happening again because I did not think that was a reality, and it is. And so that's kind of what I'm struggling with the most at the moment. One of my housemates had a hard time for a couple days after. In the morning, she'd wake up hearing like the screams and stuff in the theater, which hasn't really been happening to me, but she was right there with me, and I know that happened to her, so it just shows how differently everyone's going to come out of a situation like that and the different fears or whatever that we're going to have after something like that. Yeah, so we were fully informed at that point, not that they had told us, but people have phones and people talk, and so everyone had kind of been communicating within the theater together, and at that point I had been awake for so long, and it was like 5 a.m, and I was groggy and half asleep and just so relieved to hear that I was going to get out of Mandalay Bay because more than anything, that's what I wanted, was to just not be there anymore. So basically, when a bus finally came that I could get on, me and my friends were just literally half asleep, just standing in a line of people waiting to just get out of there, and it felt very unreal. Like I can't put words to it. We just walked through a line of police, that were just kind of ushering us off to the bus, and I don't know, it was very, very strange to me to have to think that in order to leave a building, I had to do so standing in between, police officers, which was scary because it made me feel like they still weren't positive that everything was okay or not, because if it was, why did we need to? But I guess it was, because that had been taken care of hours before that. Honestly, coming out of what I did, I wish nobody had any, because then there'd be nothing to fear, but that's not. In an ideal world, I just really wish the guns didn't exist, quite honestly, but it's not the case. So I wish that there was more regulation, and something that really scared me was that, in an airport we go through metal detectors and everything's checked and that's okay, and something that I kept saying, which clearly doesn't make sense, is that, we don't check bags when you check into a hotel, so he could have whatever in his luggage going up there, and it made me really wish that we did have more regulation or stricter rules or something enforced to ensure that somebody couldn't do something like that. But then I kind of realized, we're allowed though, you're allowed to have guns, so even if they did check bags, maybe not what he had, but I don't know. I wish there was something more that we could do to enforce it, but it seems unrealistic. Oh yeah, I literally have videos of me right before it started that I was sending to people, taping how cool it was in there, and it was really cool. It was awesome, and we were so excited, and then out of nowhere, our entire night was flipped upside down. So, and that was our last night there, and so it very much so ruined a very, very fun weekend. Well, I didn't get home right away. My flight got moved an entire day later. I was supposed to be in on Monday, and I didn't get back until Tuesday, which, I guess was fine. It gave me a day to just sit and think and relax, but it delayed things with school a lot, which, believe me, coming back and dealing with the stress of catching up with school was not easy, especially when you really don't want to leave your house or do anything. So I took 2 or 3 mental health days that I didn't do class, I didn't do homework, I didn't do anything, but all of my profs were really, really understanding with stuff. So, well, my parents woke up to all the messages, and I had updated them that I got out of there and I was home and I was okay. And so I'm sure for them, I can't even imagine waking up and reading that the roller coaster that my messages went through that they had to read. But they immediately called me 1,000 times in the morning, and I was like, no, I'm good, it's all fine. And both of them kind of just kept telling me that although they wish they could have been up to support me through the whole thing, as a parent, it was so much easier to know nothing until they knew I was safe. The first thing they had heard was that, yes, this happened, but I'm fine. So my parents were super relieved that they weren't awake to have to sit and go through the what if type scenarios, because there was none, because I was fine by the time they had woken up and talked to me. It was just people from the theater show, unless, there was somebody that they knew that was at the concert. There was a guy, my phone had died when we were in there, and I was looking for some way to charge it to tell my family that I was okay, and I was in the lobby, and this guy had a portable charger, and everyone was just so comforting to each other, because it was such an intense thing to go through. And he offered me to use his portable charger for a little, and so just to get my phone on and text my family. And so I sat on the floor of the theater with a stranger just talking for a little, and he kept crying and telling me that his daughter wanted to go to that country fest, and she was so adamant about it and was begging him if she could go, and he kept telling her no, and he didn't feel like she was old enough for her first concert type of a thing, and so he didn't end up letting her go, and he kept crying relief to me that his daughter wasn't there. But everyone there was just from the theater, because I don't think from the country fest. I'm not sure what the evacuation was from there. I have no idea where they ended up, but from what I remember, it was just everyone from the theater that had been dropped off at UNLV. I know you weren't allowed to enter the strip, so I guess if they were still there, they could probably stay, but if they were out having dinner or something and were trying to come back to the hotel, I knew you weren't allowed. You could not enter anything. It was a whole crime scene, literally in the backspace of the hotel, so yeah. And not even Columbus home, just off the strip home, just being out of the main scene of Vegas. I would say hitting a real bed in a suburban home that was not in the strip is the first second that I felt relieved and I felt better. Emotionally, though, I would say that it's only been much, much better the past 2 days. Before then, I'd cry randomly a couple times a day and couldn't really explain it. But now it's a lot better. But yeah, my first relief was just getting out of the strip, I'd say.